Hey, this is Catalyst. Welcome. We're going to start really very quickly, right to the point, because we want to give our chiefs plenty of time to answer questions. In the back, we have, if there are those of you who are on Zoom or Facebook Live, Mr. Woo Woo himself, John Torres, is your host, and you'll be yes, sir, and you'll be able to interact with him through the chat. I want to thank Starbucks. You get up anytime you want, and there'll be a couple of people walking around during the interview today so that you can fill up your gas tank with Starbucks. And I want to thank Desiree Stanton and Luis over here at J Street for providing that for us. We do want to thank all of our sponsors for Catalyst, which is Access Plus, Oak Valley Community Bank, Rolling F Credit Union, and coming soon, Blue Shield of California is sponsoring us as well. So that's what we'll have going. So let me continue with some instructions. Want to ask you, right in front of you is a sign-up sheet. If you could, if you're brand new and a guest with us here, if you could just fill out the information. We promise not to bombard you with information, but just to keep you informed of what's going on. We've got some great stuff happening at Catalyst and also with City Ministry Network. We'll just keep you up to date on that. During this morning, we have asked Sheriff Dirkse and Modesto Police Chief Brandon Gillespie to just answer questions. We have an incredible moderator who I respect deeply, Michael Baldwin, and they'll introduce themselves here in a minute. But before we do that, I want to introduce to you two people that are important to many of us in the community. First, I want to introduce to you Leah Ashford, where she's coming up somewhere. Leah is Ashford Coaching. And why didn't you fall down? You should have fallen down.
I know, sorry.
That's all right. Okay. Leah Ashford is a life coach and is a consultant for numerous organizations here in town, is a representative for City Ministry Network in the Forward Together committee, and I'll let her describe that. And then another representative on the committee is Mr. Nico Solario himself. Come on up, Nico. I just want you to know, when I was younger, this is what I used to look like. Look, Nico, this is what you got to look forward to, man.
I'll still have my beard, though.
Welcome, these two.
All right, thank you. Happy to be here with you guys today. They just asked us to say a few words before the panel.
Just a minute.
Can you make it?
Can we get someone to grab his hand on the way down?
About our participation in the Forward Together work group, which was put together last July by our mayor and the city council because they wanted to hear from local people the perspective in our community about policing. Instead of just listening to the national debate, they wanted to hear, what do people who live here think about policing here? And I've been encouraged. There's a lot of different organizations and individuals in the group. I am on the team representing City Ministry Network. And Nico, who are you representing?
I'm representing the community, people in the community, and some family members that I have that are also in law enforcement.
Right. So I love the fact that we have people in the group that run the gamut of perspectives, all the ways from those who are completely supportive of the police and don't want to see any changes, to those who are very highly concerned and want to see radical changes, and everything in between. And I have appreciated that everybody has been able to share with respect, listen to each other with respect, because we've been asked by the city council to get together and discuss 3 different areas. Any changes we'd like to see in policies and procedures for the police, accountability, and
alternative response.
Thank you. It's what's that A word? Alternative response models. And I'm even on the subcommittee. And I've been encouraged to see that the police were actually already looking into alternative response models themselves, and I'll let them talk about that when they come up. But the other thing that I have learned by being part of the committee is they ask each one of us when we first came and introduced ourselves, who is it that you're bringing into the room with you? Who are you here on behalf of? And learning that every single person has a personal story of why this matters to them. I know for me, I'll share mine and have them show the picture of my nephew, Sam. He's the reason why I wanted to be on the committee and be involved in this. He was adopted by my brother and my sister-in-law as a baby, and he is now 18, 6'5", and very solidly built, I'll say. My concern, I have had a lot of fear for him that if he were in a traffic stop and made to get out of the car just because of his size, he would seem intimidating. And because he's 18, he might be mouthy or something, even though he's been taught how to handle himself in a traffic stop and be respectful. He's still 18. So my concern is that the situation could get dangerous, and I've been very afraid for him. But the other thing, he was always asked, did he want to be in football, right, or basketball, because he's 6'5". He did not want to be in any of that. He actually loves computers, and he's a nerd, so he's pretty shy. But the other thing that has helped me in being part of Forward Together is we were invited to be part of the simulation training that the police have been doing with their officers. You'll see me here in the police car and holding a blue fake gun. And so what we got to see was the de-escalation training that they're taking officers through, and then real-life scenarios that they are participating in to practice responding in real-life scenarios. When that is through, they take them back, they debrief what worked, what didn't work. I don't think I did too well, but seeing the process they're taking them through now for training actually helped to allay some of the fears that I've had for my nephew, fears that I've had, because I could easily see with the training they're receiving how they would be able to recognize him for the immature teenager that he is versus someone with actual criminal intent. And I'm grateful for that, because I know being part of Forward Together, I've heard people who have encountered problems with that before. So I'm encouraged seeing the training that's happening. So
yeah.
And what is your personal story, Nico, that you bring to Forward Together?
So I also did the simulation, and it kind of put me into a different perspective. Going in there, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of felt like the job could have been done better, per se. But once going through the simulation and the training and stuff like that, it's actually a very difficult job. You have to make, split-second decisions. But for me, being in this Forward Together committee, I'm more focused on policies and procedures. And growing up, I had an Oakland police stepfather. And now I do have a family member in the sheriff department. And what I want to focus on is the mental health of our police officers. I feel like everything that they go through, just me going through the simulation and different things that came up, I felt myself getting, anxious and afraid sometimes, and it was just a simulation. These guys are out there, women are out there every day going through different situations, and a lot of those situations, they stay with them. And so going home to their families, to their friends, some of this stuff can come out, and it's not meant to be, pushed onto their family members, but it could affect their homes. And so for me, I'm more worried about the police officers and their mental health and getting them more access to mental health, more resources. So that's what I'm here for, to just really advocate for that as well.
That's great, thank you. So I think the important thing for us as we come to the panel this morning is to remember every single person comes into the room and comes to this subject with their personal stories, and that we can make sure we hear from each other and we listen to each other, because I know even the panelists, every single one of us has an important personal reason why we want to make sure we have a community that's safe for all of us. So I want to invite Michael Baldwin up. Thank you, Nico. Let's see if I can get your introduction up here. So Michael, that's why I brought my glasses. So Michael is a consultant, and this got very small all of a sudden. He helps professionals think strategically while being emotionally connected to their own humanity for those they serve and work in collaboration with. He has 26 years working with juveniles in the California prison system. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
Well, I did work with juveniles while they were in prison.
Okay.
I was one of those juveniles for a while myself.
Got it. Okay. So you bring that personal perspective.
I do.
Yes, yeah. And he is going to be moderating the panel discussion this morning.
Yes,
I'll let
thank you.
introduce them.
All right, thank you, Leah. Let's give a hand for Leah. Did a great job. Be careful. And so I'm blessed to have an opportunity to be here with you this morning and to introduce two men that I've gained great respect for, and we don't want to waste any more time. The goal of today is really just for us to have a conversation and for you all to just be a fly on the wall listening to this dialogue between myself and Brandon Gillespie and Jeff Dirkse. So let's have a seat. All right. Let's hang out this morning. All right. All right. So how are you guys doing this morning?
Great.
All right. Marvin kind of like stole the show earlier already.
Yeah, I had to be very careful walking up those
I wasn't going to try to follow that entrance.
Yeah.
So.
Right. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you is, let's start with you, Brandon. Modesto hired you in July of 2001, and you worked up through the ranks and became interim chief in 2020, and now you're the chief. What was that journey like?
It's been interesting. I think it's been challenging times. I think my career, I've been blessed throughout my entire career. The culmination of what I think, never expected to be chief, but I think growing up in this community and then serving this community as a police officer and then ultimately becoming the police chief here is kind of just put the cherry on top of my career. But I'll tell you, the last 2 years in general law enforcement has been extremely challenging. Yeah. But it's something that is a challenge, but also gives me hope and also challenges. And so it's been the full basket of challenges and opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Jeff, you became sworn in as a law enforcement officer in 2007, and eventually worked your way through the ranks and was sworn in as sheriff. And what was it, 2019?
Yep.
And now you're getting ready to be sheriff again.
Yeah, so I've been sheriff now for almost 3.5 years, and I'm up for re-election technically in June, but I don't have an opponent, so y'all are stuck with me. Or you can vote for Mickey Mouse. That Mickey Mouse is the #1 write-in candidate.
Right.
No, so I should be sheriff for the next 4.5 years, and it has been, like Brandon said, it's really been an interesting ride. The first year was relatively benign. And then, of course, COVID hit, and everybody knows the story after that. I actually refer to life as pre-COVID and post-COVID.
Right.
So, that's how I measure everything.
All right. So when you think about your roles as law enforcement just coming through the ranks, what changed the most when you became the boss?
Everything. No, I think you're as you grow throughout the ranks, as you come up through the ranks, your perspective changes. As an officer, you're worried about going out and doing the best job that you can every single day and handling every call that you can the right way. But as you progress, you have much a broader perspective. And I think for me, becoming the police chief, especially in turbulent times, it was very important for me to be the face of our department and get out in the community and meet with as many groups as I could to have them show, from my perspective, what the police department's all about. And I saw that as my leadership role in trying to bridge that gap between some that have a lot of distrust in the community for us and the police, and I could help be that gap.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in the military, so this idea of being in charge of units is not really new to me. I've done that repeatedly. I also, in private business, ran my own business for a period of time before I got into law enforcement. So that idea of being the boss is not completely new or foreign. However, when you look at the sheriff's office, it's an organization of over 800 people, and it is by far the largest organization that I've had the honor of leading. Your perspective very much changes. Kind of like Brandon said, we talk a lot of times about issues, and my response is usually where you stand depends on where you sit. So like at the sheriff's office, if you sit behind the wheel of a patrol vehicle as a deputy, your perspective on an issue, this coffee cup, might be one angle. Now, my perspective as the sheriff may be very different because I sit in a very different seat, and that does not make either one of us wrong, right? Just like any member of the community that's out there sees an issue a certain way because based on where they sit, that doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. We simply look at things from different angles. And the first thing you have to do is simply acknowledge that, and then we have to try to understand each other's perspectives. So it's working your way through that.
Right. And you mentioned turbulent times, and I'm one of those guys that like for us to address the elephant in the room, right? And so when we think about turbulent times, what is your views on racism, and how do you work to keep potentially racist officers from your ranks? How do you deal with that?
Clearly that is on everyone's mind, especially in the last 2 years. It has been, it's actually been part of our national narrative since our country was formed, and we have gone through this over and over and over again. And I tend to take a fairly optimistic view, and by that I mean I look at it in terms of the progress that we have collectively made. That doesn't mean that we're perfect. So specifically to the sheriff's office, the first step always starts in the hiring process. That is really the very first entry point as to how we screen and select our staff, and that has dramatically improved even in the 15 years that I've been at the sheriff's office. Brandon's law enforcement career began sooner or earlier than mine did, but it is far more in-depth, far more selective, and we intentionally screen for all of that, whether it's racial bias, maybe an orientation bias, a religious bias, anything like that. It's a very intentional process, and any indicators they do not pass. And I will tell you, it actually gets harder, I think, once someone is an employee, because now you have employee rights that start to kick in, and there are certain things we can and cannot do. But we always screen for that and monitor that. And if there's an issue, we address it. Now, here's what the public doesn't typically see. You don't typically see the number of people that we discipline for something. Again, some of this has to do with employee law and rights and what can and cannot be publicly released. But we retrain, discipline, or fire lots of people, not necessarily on the topic of race, but for a variety of reasons. But most of that is just not extremely open to the public. It may be that Smith is no longer working here, but the why of it is oftentimes not something that we can release. There are some legal criteria or legal categories where we can, but there are also times when we cannot.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, and just to echo what Jeff said, the hiring process is designed to screen out anybody with any type of biases, and we do that, and I think it reflects in the amount of people, and this isn't just related to racism, but just in general, the quality of candidate we're looking for, the amount of percentage of people who wash out of the process, I think shows how selective we are. And that our employees go through polygraph evaluations or interviews to ensure that what they're saying is true. And then I think Jeff would agree, the leader of the organization, Jeff and I, set the tone for what's acceptable in our organizations. And I know that both of us don't accept employees who would be racist or have a bias against anybody due to any of the orientation, race, any of the protected classes. We don't stand for that. And if someone were to be accused of that, then it would go through the internal process, investigation, and we'd make sure that was dealt with.
Okay. So what challenges are you facing when it comes to finding, training, and keeping good people in the ranks, right? And then when you get these individuals in the ranks, how are you attempting to mirror the demographics of the communities that they serve? Because sometimes we can have Caucasian male law enforcement predominantly dominating communities of color, right? What role? What are you doing to kind of balance that out in your hiring process? How challenging
Yeah,
is it?
good question. I think that there's, I'll try to be as brief as I can, but I think it is a culmination of so many things, right? You have the last two years that we've seen growing tension between law enforcement and specifically communities of color. And so that can directly translate to minority communities that are willing to even apply to be police officers. And so those are things that we look at, because when I took over as interim police chief, one of the things we looked at was what is our demographic makeup of the police department. And where we have around, I think 41% or so of our city is Hispanic, we only had about 20% of our sworn officers being Hispanic. And so that is something that we're still crunching the data on to see, is it something in our hiring process that is excluding Hispanics? Is it that we don't have Hispanics applying? And how do we pull in that demographic? Because we want to reflect the community. I want us to reflect the community. So far since I've taken over, it's not been a huge, but we went from 20 to 22% Hispanic, and I'll take that as a win, and we're going to keep growing. But those are things as you have certain populations of people who may feel excluded. It's the community outreach, it's the community engagement, it's the conversations to get those people to apply so that we can reflect our community. I think those are the challenges, more so in the last 2 years, just because of the growing political divide, the COVID where you can't get out into the community, and then just growing disconnect between law enforcement due to, I'm sure we'll get into that, media and other things where has caused issues.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Brandon, I think would agree with this. The first thing is, we'll hire anybody that'll pass our background. So that's always the first thing.
Agreed.
We need volume, right? We have so many seats and so many vacancies. We need people in those seats. And, so that's always the first thing. And what we have seen, so if we back up to George Floyd, when this kind of current situation really came to our national forefront, we predicted a drop in applicants like immediately, and it didn't happen. We didn't see it right away. It took about another year, and then because we just saw our applicant pool, it stayed really steady, and we were all a little surprised, and we thought, wow, we're doing okay, and then it just started to drop off about a year later, plus or minus a few months, and so that's always a challenge. So the first thing is we'll take anybody who can pass the background. Now, with that, Brandon already kind of alluded to a lot of things. We don't get necessarily a certain number of applicants from certain communities. Like when I became sheriff, I'll just use the Sikh community as a specific example. We never used to allow the wearing of either turbans or other religious garb. That was never part of our uniform. We changed that, right? So if someone is now practicing Sikh and they want to wear a turban as part of their uniform, they certainly may do so. The only requirement is that it be black, right? Because that matches our uniform headgear. And that's a non-issue. My understanding is that the actual turban color doesn't have specific significance. And so they were all very agreeable to that. And we only have one. We had one. He was hired. He did not pass training. And then we also have now a current employee that is moving to that. We've all authorized beards anyway, so everybody can have one. But specifically, as we're talking about any kind of religion or demographic that requires that, great, have a beard. That's perfectly fine. So those are just some of the examples of things that we've done. But the other thing is that, like at the sheriff's office specifically, we see specifically in operations, our field staff, a lack of female applicants that want to come there. I think MPD has a higher ratio of female officers than we do. Turlock does. It's always been kind of I don't know, I've never understood it. In adult detention, we have had a higher ratio of female applicants over there. However, we've also promoted the first female captain in the history of the sheriff's office, and suddenly I have more female deputies out there. And so, when any demographic starts to climb the ladder and they become more visible, that sends a message that to that community, that demographic, that they're accepted there. And so I'm very pleased with that. Now, the other thing that I was saying, I think you kind of asked about like promotion and so on. This is the other thing, and I'll say this very openly, and I'm not bothered by it. I don't promote anyone because they meet a demographic. I think that's actually insulting to them. This is my opinion, that I never want my female captain to think that she was promoted to captain simply because she was female. It's because she was the most qualified applicant. And so when we talk about this idea of our internal demographics mirroring our community, that also takes a lot of time, right? Going back to that idea of as they climb the ranks, they become more visible, and then that community embraces it more. That just doesn't happen overnight. And so I believe that as we continue to move forward, you will see more people of color, females, whatever category you want to put out there, we'll also start to look at our profession.
Right. Thanks for that. Really good answers. When you think about being open to the public, like so much information isn't open to the public, how much has, like, George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, forced law enforcement to kind of like pull back the veil of policing to allow communities to peek behind the veil so as to allow the communities to feel more engaged when it comes to law enforcement and to hold law enforcement a little bit more accountable? How important is accountability?
Well, accountability is extremely important because that develops trust. And trust is the cornerstone of what we have to have with the community to police effectively, because if we don't have that, then we become an occupying force, right? And that's not how we want to police our communities. But I think with George Floyd, I think it just started a conversation again, right? You go back to Rodney King, and there was a conversation started with that. Anytime that there is a significant issue involving law enforcement, especially the minority community, and George Floyd was a tragic death that started a conversation I think that most of us probably haven't seen in our lifetimes. And so I think there was a lot of good conversations that have come out of that. And, you know, there's always been, I think, this mysterious veil, mysteriousness about law enforcement that people don't understand. And I think the conversations that have come out of George Floyd have just continued to push law enforcement to be open about what we're doing. I know that being in law enforcement for almost 21 years now, I want people to see law enforcement through my eyes. Because when I look at our department, I couldn't be more proud of the men and women we have serving our community. But I know that everybody doesn't feel like that because of what do they see, you know, on the national media in different places. When you see what happens in Minneapolis, that reflects all of us in law enforcement. But I want people to see our department, the law enforcement in this county, through my eyes, but I have to be willing to see the perspective through somebody else's eyes if I want them to reciprocate and see that. And so those conversations, I think, are happening more and more in law enforcement. I know Leah and Nico came up and talked about the Forward Together Committee, and I'll tell you, that is some of the best conversations that we've had and been able to have dialogue back and forth. And some work that we've done with you and some of the minority community, man, some of those conversations to be able to share perspectives and see the perspective through each other's eyes, I mean, you have aha moments, and these talks about transformational change. That's how it happens. The challenge is, how do you do that on a mass scale? How do you scale it up between small groups? How do you get that across either our department, this county, this state, this nation? That's the challenge, but that's what, you know, the conversation surrounding George Floyd, accountability, alternative responses, all the policies and procedures, those are the conversations that are happening, and where we can make changes and that makes sense, we're doing it. And where things that from our perspective, there already are measures in place, oftentimes we have those conversations, and I think the community has aha moments sometimes too and says, wow, you already have all these things in place? Oh, okay. And so sometimes it's just that conversation that helps bring people together and dissolves that mysteriousness around what we do.
So do you think that a law enforcement agency can police itself?
100%. We do it all the time. And, you know, so kind of by way of example, you know, there are things that we can't talk about with employee laws and rules and so on. I've already alluded to that, but I think about a month ago, I had a police chief from an agency in this county tell me that he had encountered a member of my staff that had done something inappropriate. This particular individual, of my team, was in a kind of an at-will status. He was fired by the end of the day, or released. It's not tolerated. And we do that over and over. They aren't necessarily terminated, right? That's not necessarily the case based on the egregiousness or whatnot. And sometimes people have to build their resume, to put it politely to where they get to a point where you can terminate them or take a fairly significant action, right? You know, depending on what the offense is. You know, a lot of times it starts with, you know, counseling or a verbal conversation, a counseling memo or retraining. Then there may, then we can start to implement discipline eventually up to to include termination. You know, but with that, we also have to make sure that we do it right, because otherwise, when we see this over and over again, is if we terminate someone inappropriately or without kind of the resume behind it, it'll go to arbitration or a lawsuit and they get their job back. And there was actually a great article several years ago, I think it came out of IACP, International Association of the Chiefs of Police, about how law enforcement, we regularly hold people accountable, and then through kind of the arbitration by firing them, and then through the arbitration process, we're forced to take them back. So we have to make sure that we do it correctly. Now, can there be some process change there? Of course there can. And now a lot of that goes to state law. Recently, and I fully support it, they have implemented the ability to decertify law enforcement members. California is one of only 4 states that has lacked that, right? So if you have a post certificate as a cop, even though you may have been fired or resigned in lieu of termination or something like that, you could go and in theory get hired by another agency because you're still certified to be a cop.
Right.
And that is now something that's on the table, and now they're going through the bureaucratic process of what will it be like, what will it take to decertify someone? What process will that be? What kind of adjudication is there? And, I have great concerns both ways. I have concern for my staff or my profession that someone could be decertified probably inappropriately or maybe too soon. And then I also have concern for the public that if law enforcement, if we don't get this right, then you have people that could maintain their certification and get hired somewhere else. And I will tell you, we have gotten rid of some folks that have been employed at other agencies, and I'm very disappointed in those agencies that given that they actually hired this person. And again, I won't or can't go into some of the names and the reasons why, but like one specific example was a 1421 case, meaning that we can publicly and did release the file, and the agency still hired the guy. So to me, that it's very disappointing.
Yeah, thanks for that. So when you think about your legacies, like when you've hung up your hat, what do you want and what do you hope that people will say about Jeff or about Brandon? This was how Brandon did it. This was how Jeff did it. This is what he left. What is that going to be?
That one's hard. You go first.
Right? I think my perspective has always been, I've tried to do the best job that I could in whatever position I was in. So when I look at what people are going to say about me when I left or when I leave, I'm not really concerned about that. What I want to be able to do is sit back someday in retirement, drinking coffee, and look back and say, man, I was so proud to work for that organization. And I had a little something to do with it. And that's what I want to do. I don't care that when I leave and a year later I walk back in the front door and they're like, sir, who are you here to meet? Did you need to talk to somebody? Who are you? That is fine. I have zero problem. But I want to leave this agency better than I found it. And I want to continue to see this agency thrive and have a community that supports it. So I guess if that's a legacy, that's what I want. But as far as me and what they're going to say about me, I don't worry about that. I know that if I go home and I do the best job that I can do every day, I sleep just fine at night.
Yeah, I think the 2 words that came to mind immediately when you asked the question are fair and innovative. And by fair, I mean fair to everyone, to my team, to the community, and that we handle things with balance. And sometimes that balance requires significant action, right? I mean, we can insert the crazy scenario that might happen, and we need to respond to that very decisively and take action and resolve that. And then sometimes we need to have a different response. Looking at the clock, I don't think we're really going to get to alternative response models, right? But there needs to be a balance in how we handle things, and how we engage with the community or whatnot. So it's that idea of kind of fair, balanced. I think that's a news tagline, so I'll leave it at that. But then the other thing is innovative, and that is kind of changing the dynamic and how we do things. And again, that can be a very broad topic. Internally, we're looking at a number of both processes and technology. That's kind of in our next iteration of things. But innovation is not just tech. I know you guys briefly talked about Forward Together, but we started something about 2 years ago called Project Resolve, a very similar effort, slightly different model, following the George Floyd incident, to where we can have these conversations with the community, and they have been very interesting and very productive. And I didn't really jump in on that transparency thing. We moved on. But, one of the challenges as we talk about this idea of innovation and everything and transparency and kind of all of this, it's keeping community engagement when there's not an issue. That is one of the hardest things, right? So we see George Floyd. There is great community engagement and interest in the profession of law enforcement. As we resolve things, discuss things, whatever, that's, people's attention moves on, right, wrong, or indifferent, they no longer care. Right. And so that conversation goes away until, God forbid, there will be the next incident, and there will be the next incident. Then that will all come roaring back. But we have to continue that conversation over and over and over every day. When it comes to this issue of transparency, and in the interest of time, I'm not really going to go on it, but I know Kate Trumpeter's sitting right there, and she knows what I'm going to say. The question with transparency, everybody says, we want law enforcement to be transparent, and my question is, what do you want to know that I won't tell you? And I have yet to get succinct answers to that question, and I've asked it for 2 years. And so with keeping that community engagement and the community engaged in the process, that I think is how we're going to answer that question in the long run, because a lot of folks don't even know what they want to know about law enforcement.
Yes, appreciate that. So we're checking the time. We're going to run out of time briefly, but I really want to, we have these, when we check the data and we look at the demographics of individuals who are supportive of law enforcement, we tend to see an older population. When we see those who are most challenging to law enforcement or who have a more critical view, they seem to be a younger population. What do you say to them?
Let's have a conversation. Let's be part of the change. I think that's historically been what we've probably seen throughout the ages, is the younger population, as they come up, they have a lot of distrust for government in general. And law enforcement is often the face of government for local communities. And so, there's been several polls. I know Project Resolve did a poll. We did a poll a few years ago, and it shows overwhelming support for law enforcement in our community, in Stanislaus County and in the city of Modesto. But when you look at, dig into those numbers, you do see kind of what you're saying is reflective. You see, older people that have more support, younger people who don't, and then you go back and you look at demographics and you see that minority communities have less trust in law enforcement than other demographics. And so while I'm very proud that we have support, overwhelming support for law enforcement in this community, we can't stop there. We have to be able to reach out and talk. So I think our younger generation, it's getting people involved, coming and doing ride-alongs, having conversations, really, again, pulling back that veil of what we do. And I can tell you, having open houses, having ride-alongs, doing the force option simulator training that Leah and Nico went through, and many others, having those things helps start conversations. And we can have conversations, and we can get to know each other. Perspective changes on both sides. And I think that's often we get our information now from media or social media. Mm-hmm. And I've never seen an argument yet on Facebook where the one party has said, oh, you're right. I've never seen that yet. If anybody has, please send it my way. But that never happens. So arguments over Facebook or social media never resolve an issue. When we sit down at a table like this and we have conversations, that's what makes a difference. And I think with our younger generation, we need to try to connect that way.
Thanks. Jeff? Someone's blocking the clock back there. Can you move, please?
It's going to be real close. Brandon said a lot of it, and so I'm not going to reiterate that. But the other thing, when we specifically talk about engaging with the younger population, and as much as I hate social media, even though I have a fairly strong presence on it, because I have to, but social media is where it's really at for a lot of that, at least that initial touch with them. I have 3 kids. They're all in their 20s now, so they're actually relatively old. But they get kids get buried in those devices, and that's where they get everything. And we can all debate. I'm sure everybody here follows certain things on social media that probably tends to agree more or less with what your personal beliefs are. And so as people go down rabbit holes, it draws them in a certain direction. We could talk about social media for
Well, I really
4
appreciate
days.
both of you guys being open and honest and able to have this type of a dialogue. And I just want to leave you with one thought. At some point, you may want to consider, as an alternative response, is allowing for those who are formerly incarcerated or those who are felons to be included in the ranks of law enforcement, to be paid employees. You kind of use that model already, right? Sometimes you have what they call snitches and stuff like that, but they don't get paid. But if you had individuals who had criminal backgrounds, you may end up creating a robust law enforcement field with individuals who know about crime. And with that,
That was a cliffhanger that we could have another 2-hour conversation on.
I know. With that, we want to welcome Marvin Jacobo back up, and really let's appreciate these gentlemen for this conversation. Did you save them? You save them from
they're all clapping because I made it on the stage. Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you. We are going to end very quickly. Chiefs have to be at a meeting at 8:30 with other county law enforcement officials, so they will be here just for a few minutes. We're going to end early to give you a chance to go back and ask them any questions if you want. I'm going to encourage you as friends, don't dominate their time. If you've got a long question that needs to be asked, you can schedule another time with them since they work for us. You can schedule a time, meet with them. And by the way, Ruth Baca, your administrative assistant, she's amazing. Now, I didn't know Near's drift, but Ruth's been crazy good. Please take 15, 20 seconds right in front of you as a feedback form. Really helpful for us to know which field. You can leave them right in the middle, and Gabriella, the boss, wherever she is, she'll be up here soon. We'll collect those afterwards. These catalysts are to be catalysts for significant conversations, connecting, inspirational talks. Please, this week, or in the next few days, next hours, just connect with somebody, share with them what happened today. Go ahead, kick it around, what you agreed with, what you didn't agree with, and celebrate, whatever, push back, and have those. This is what these are about. So I want to encourage you, please, to do that. And I want to thank the Chiefs for both of them and for Michael for being a part with us. Also, want to let you know in the next day or so, you will be getting, if you are on our Catalyst email list, you will be getting a chance to push the button and go ahead and watch a replay of the video of what happened this morning. So you can also send it to a friend if you want to. City Minister Network is a 501c3 faith-based nonprofit. So please, if you are so inclined to support us financially, it'd be great. At this time, I want to introduce to you the mayor of Modesto, Sue Zawalin. And Sue's going to share with us. Oh, I got her, and there's no doubt about that. Look at her. Shoot, you don't need me. I've asked Sue to talk to us just real quick about. Is that on?
Is this on?
There we go. About next month.
I just want to mention that I also participated in the Force Option Simulator with my partner Solange Altman. You do not want us
Solange.
On the Force. We will just say that right now. In both scenarios. I want to welcome everyone back to Catalyst next month. It's every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. I've been attending for years. I've been so educated with everything going on in our community, and next month will be no exception. We will be talking about Modesto 2050, about the general plan update. The general plan is the roadmap for what our city will look like for the next 30 years regarding housing, jobs, services, and it will only be as successful as each of you participating with us. The council represents you, the people. So please come out as you hear more about this in the future. Fill out all the surveys, do all the polls, share your perspective, and that's what will make Modesto 2050 successful. Hope to see you next month, 7 a.m.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. You also will be invited, and I think Sue alluded to it, you'll be invited to participate in some different ways going forward. So get ready to have your voice heard and participate with how Modesto is going to grow and develop over the next couple decades. We're going to dismiss you. I'm going to ask Gabriella here to close us in prayer. A couple of different things. If you wanted to go back and talk to the chiefs, they'll be somewhere, probably right. We'll just keep you here for a few minutes. But around the tables as well, on the screen is the question. If you'd like to sit around the table with your friends there and talk about over just what they heard, as well as Leah asked me this question in the back. What's your personal response about the morning? So you might want to finish that sentence, or you might want to say, here's my response from this morning, and share that around the table as well. So I'm going to ask the boss to close us in prayer, and then we are done.
All right, Father, thank you so much for this morning, this space, and more importantly, everybody here. Thank you for Jeff, Brandon, and Michael. Thank you for the people they are and how they serve in our community. God, I pray that you bless them and protect them, including everyone in this room. Thank you. Amen. Feel free to get some pan dulce, too.
And Jeremiah just mentioned to us today at noon is a National Day of Prayer, so at the 10th Street Plaza if you're interested in doing that.